Hello and welcome to Inside the Americas. I'm Laura Cellier. Coming up in the programme, a day of remembrance marred by scandal. We find out what happened to Argentina's efforts to honour the victims of the country's dirty war. Plus, a truce to end violence in El Salvador appears to have run its course. We'll bring you a special report on how gangland murders are once again on the rise. And all aboard for the world's most dangerous journey, we take a tour of the Brazilian ship on its way to scientists at the South Pole. But first, rescue teams worked around the clock this week after a small town near Seattle was devastated by a huge mudslide. The death toll was expected to rise, with dozens of people listed as missing or unaccounted for. Around 200 homes were completely destroyed. Well, adding to the victims' pain, the Seattle Times reported that the US Army warned this area was vulnerable to such a catastrophe way back in 1999. While staying in the United States with two issues that bitterly divide public opinion, Obamacare and birth control. Well, both were the subject of a fierce debate in the Supreme Court this week. Two family-owned businesses are challenging a clause which requires them to provide certain contraceptives in their healthcare plans. Well, the ruling could have important consequences for Obama's landmark policy. Aurora Dupuy has the story.
The people united will never be defeated!
Women's rights versus religious freedom. That's what the Hobby Lobby case is all about. The arts and crafts retailer refuses to provide contraception coverage to its employers, while Obamacare requires it under the Affordable Care Act, or else the retailer could face a hefty fine.
The choice that the government has forced on us is unfair and not in keeping with the history of our great nation, founded on religious freedom. We believe that Americans don't lose their religious freedom when they open a family business.
Anti-abortion militants support Hobby Lobby. For them, shareholder corporations should not cover birth control methods which they believe cause abortions.
The Obamacare HHS mandate persecutes Christians and Catholics.
We believe that real health care should respect life, and what this case is really about is forcing business owners who have sincerely held beliefs that life begins at conception to fund abortion-causing drugs against their will.
The first hearing took place on Tuesday, and judges at the US Supreme Court seem divided. Can employers be exempt from offering their workers a health package on religious grounds?
Birth control is under attack!
The issue has sparked outrage from women's rights activists.
I can't believe we're still fighting for this right so many years after birth control came about. It seems like we're way back in the 60s and the 70s again.
Just 6 months after Obamacare was implemented, another corporation also brought its case to the Supreme Court. Judges are expected to give their decision at the end of June.
People in Argentina have been marking the 38th anniversary of the military coup with a day of remembrance for the 30,000 people who disappeared in the so-called Dirty War. Thousands marched in the capital Buenos Aires, but the day itself has been marred by controversy, with the foundation in charge of the commemoration accused of funneling off tens of millions of dollars in funding. Rebecca Martin has this report.
It was said to be the Kirchner's flagship social housing program. A total of 5,000 apartments built by the Madres de Plaza de Mayo Foundation. But corruption allegations started pouring in 2011, and the organization put a halt to the construction. Luis was fired overnight. The organization owes him 35,000 pesos, about 4,000 euros. Like him, over 2,000 people have lodged a complaint.
De las peores bajezas nos trataba la señora Eve.
Ebe de Bonafini has abused us in the worst possible way. She thinks because we're poor, we have to keep quiet. They owe us unpaid extra hours, social security and pension contributions, bonuses, all that.
The Madres de Plaza de Mayo Foundation is an institution in Argentina. Its president, Ebe de Bonafini, is the country's most famous human rights activist. Journalist Luz Gasuja thinks this is precisely why the organization has been used, because it is untouchable. The Kirchner government granted the Shared Dreams program to the organization without any call for tender.
Political manipulation is also characteristic of the scheme. Workers were forced to take part in marches and rallies in favor of the President Cristina Kirchner or the Madres de Plaza de Mayo Foundation, or trade unions, or local governors, or the Vice President Amadou Boudou.
Behind the program might be the biggest embezzlement scheme in the country. Hundreds of public and political figures could be involved. The government paid a total of 1,300 billion pesos to the organization, about 130 million euros, but a third of the audited funds has disappeared.
The government's responsible for transferring this amount of money over 6 years without any sort of control over housing construction. The Madres de Plaza de Mayo organization has signed checks to individuals and companies that have nothing to do with construction work. If this turns out to be true, it could be charged with criminal conspiracy.
Ebe de Bonafini could either be a victim of wrongdoing or an accomplice of the misappropriation of funds. The National Anti-Corruption Agency has yet to take over the investigation. Other corruption allegations are tainting the Argentine government. Vice President Amadou Boudou is suspected of money laundering. President Cristina Kirchner of illicit enrichment.
Now, it was a truce to end violence in one of the world's most dangerous countries. 2 years ago, the gangs of El Salvador signed a contract promising to end the bloodshed. But fast forward to today, and the number of murders is once again on the rise, with the threat of open conflict now a very real possibility.
Security operation in Mejutla, one of San Salvador's most dangerous neighborhoods, controlled by the MS-13 gang. Suddenly, gunshots are heard. Police chase suspects but make no formal arrests. For decades, the country's been torn by a gang war. 2 years ago, the main rivals, MS-13 and Barrio 18, secretly negotiated a truce. Their aim, put an end to the bloodshed that's left thousands of people dead. During the ceasefire, the city's murder rate nearly halved. But since January, authorities say that figure's been rising again, with on average 9 homicides every day.
We have nothing to do with the truce. Apparently it's an agreement between the gangs. But given the rise in homicides, we think the truce is over.
Gangs boast about their so-called sanctuaries, safer neighborhoods and rehabilitation centers like this bakery where former gangsters now work. Yet despite these efforts, many locals say the underworld business continues just the same. Bus drivers, for example, still have to pay a gang protection tax.
It's very dangerous because we have to work from 4 a.m. and if somebody doesn't like you, they can kill you at that time. As we say here, you have to pay to survive.
Previous right-wing governments have long tried to rid the country of gangsters. Prisons filled up, yet crime remained rampant. The situation seems to have slightly improved under the leftist leadership. Many hope that the freshly elected president, Salvador Sánchez Cerén, will put an end to the violence. But for most experts, the ex-guerrilla commander faces a huge challenge ahead.
What happened was a truce. A truce is when, at a moment in time, there is a ceasefire between fighters in a war. What follows is peace, and peace is always more complicated and always takes more time. That's what we're trying to build.
The next step would be to encourage mediators to restart dialogue between the gangs, a tricky task for the government that officially denies any involvement in the process.
And from one of the world's most dangerous countries to one of the most perilous journeys, the trip from the tip of Latin America to Antarctica is notoriously risky. But that's just what Brazilian warship the Ari Rangel set out to do. 80 Brazilian sailors on a mission to resupply scientists based at the South Pole, a bid to reassert Brazil's claim over the region's rich natural resources.
After a last check of the turbines, the Ari Rangel is ready to go. The Brazilian warship setting out on a perilous 4-day voyage from Punta Arenas in Chile to Antarctica. Carrying supplies to scientists working on the White Continent, The ship first has to cross the Drake Passage, one of the world's most dangerous stretches of water.
These currents come from the Pacific and get narrower between the continent of Antarctica and the continent of South America. This water mass, this energy, combined with strong winds, creates these big waves.
It's enough to make the most hardened sailors a bit seasick. The 82 crew members stick to a rigid military routine. After 5 months away from their families, some struggle to keep their spirits up.
I'm feeling a bit down because I celebrated my first wedding anniversary here on board the ship in November, but that's okay, I'm fine.
After the 40-hour crossing, the ship reaches its final destination. The stormy seas of Drake's Passage give way to the stunning snowy shores of the South Shetland Islands.
I think less than 2% of people know Antarctica. For me, it's a privilege.
Dropping off equipment, supplies and personnel, the Brazilian soldiers will spend a month moored off the Antarctic coast. Then they'll fire up the Ari Rongel's engines, take on passengers heading home, and start the voyage back up north to the warmer climes of Brazil.
Well, that's it for this edition of Inside the Americas. Thanks for watching. Until next time, goodbye.